Looks like the Red Sox are at least thinking about adding at this year's deadline. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Red Sea Radio. My name is Corbin, and yesterday was a pretty busy day when it came to conversations about the MLB deadline and where the Boston Red Sox are at. Both Alex Cora and Craig Breslow shared what their current philosophy is, looking about a month and a half ahead towards the MLB deadline, with some people believing that they could be leaning towards buying. And what we also got was our first indication as to what the Red Sox could buy if they do become buyers at this year's deadline. So what we are going to do in today's videos, we're going to break these down. We're going to talk about what Alex Cora and Craig Breslow said, what it could possibly mean, and what or who they could target at this year's deadline. Thank you all very much for clicking on this one. Let's get into it. Okay, first let's start with what Alex Cora had to say. Yesterday, like I mentioned, he spoke with reporters about his current thoughts regarding the Major League deadline, and he had this quote to say: "I think Craig has a pretty good idea who we are and what we can be in the upcoming weeks, but at the end of the day, that scoreboard with the standings is going to dictate what we're going to do later on." To me, this is a little bit of a lot of words and not a whole lot of information. A lot of people, to be honest with you, took this quote as assuming Alex Cora is ready to sell at this year's deadline, but I actually think it could be quite the opposite, and there's a big reason for that. It's the words in this quote, specifically what we can be in the upcoming weeks. Now, we've talked about this a couple of times over the past few days, but there is a very real possibility that between now and July 30th, the Boston Red Sox look completely different. Yesterday, you got Masataka Yoshida back from the IL. Today, you're going to be getting Tyler O'Neill back, and hopefully this time fully healthy. And over the next month and a half, you're going to be getting a lot of key pieces back and into this roster. You've got Tristan Casas, who should be back before the trade deadline. You've got Wilyer Abreu, who should be back pretty soon here. You've got Romy Gonzalez and Vaughn Grissom, who should be making their way back. Even guys like Chris Martin and Isaiah Campbell are working their way back to the major leagues. You've got a lot of different pieces here that could be involved over the next month and a half, and that could absolutely totally change the trajectory of the Boston Red Sox. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. He's right. At the end of the day, standings and where they are in terms of a playoff position at the deadline ultimately is going to be the biggest factor as to what the Red Sox do here. But I will say, I think health is going to be the second biggest determinant as to what the Red Sox do at the MLB deadline. And I think that's what Alex Cora was referring to when talking about what he thinks the deadline's going to look like. Again, this really didn't indicate one way or the other as to whether or not he thinks the Red Sox should buy or sell. I don't think a manager in baseball would flat out outright be like, yeah, we got to get rid of some of these guys. We ain't doing nothing this season. That'd be pretty ridiculous. But I do think it was sort of an elegant way of saying, hey, look at what we've done so far with very minimal talent on this roster, because most of it is riding pine. What do you think we could do when we're fully healthy? And I actually really like that from Alex Cora. Again, a lot of people assume that this was going to be hinting towards selling, but I actually think it was hinting towards buying a bit. The other person that spoke out about where the Red Sox could land at this year's deadline is Chief Baseball Operator Craig Breslow, who hopped on NESN yesterday before the loss to the Philadelphia Phillies and spoke about what his current thoughts are on this year's deadline. And to be honest with you, they were very similar statements to what Alex Cora said to the media, which one, automatically right off the bat, I like. I like it when your manager and CBO are thinking along the same lines. I don't know if they got together before the game and said, hey, if we're asked about this, this is what we're saying, or if they just simply were on the same page. Either way, I do kind of like that. What Craig Breslow did have to say was talking about looking at the relative health of the organization as a whole as they get closer to the deadline and where they are in the standings. Again, exactly the same thing basically as Alex Cora said, but there is one thing that I think really stood out to me in Craig Breslow's comments yesterday about the Red Sox deadline, and that was mentioning in his pregame interview that probabilities and projections are going to play a pretty big factor in his equation for the Red Sox come July 30th. Now, this is a pretty obvious statement to make, right? MLB teams always are going to have to try and figure out what they could possibly look like over the next few months, right? They're not just looking at today, they're looking at what this team could look like by the end of September. While that's an obvious statement to make, the reason it's interesting to me is because if we look at what's available to fans publicly, Fangraphs right now doesn't exactly favor the Red Sox going into the postseason, because despite the fact that they have the same record as the Toronto Blue Jays, and despite the fact that they have a better record than the Tampa Bay Rays, right now they have the worst odds in the AL East to make the postseason at 13.7%. In fact, that 13.7% is the fourth worst percentage to make the postseason in all of the AL. That's including worse than teams like the Houston Astros, who are 31-37, or the Detroit Tigers, who are 32-34. To me, it's a little bit ridiculous that the Red Sox have had all these injuries, have had all these problems, have still somehow maintained a close to 500 record, and still have worse odds than teams like the Astros, who've struggled all year. But there are definitely more factors than just, hey, what's their win-loss record right now? It probably also has a lot to do with strength of schedule for the rest of the year, overall performances from rookies, and whether or not there'll be regression on the team, right? There's a lot of factors that go into this Fangraph stuff. So if you're looking at just public information, it probably doesn't feel like the Red Sox are in any position to buy at this year's deadline. However, the good news is that MLB teams, fortunately for us, don't usually rely on Fangraph's projections to make their decisions at this year's deadline, right? They have their own projections. They have their own ways of figuring out what this team could look like if they were to plug and play different players in this franchise. So that's the good news here, but it is interesting to me that he very specifically pointed out, hey, what could we look like if we were to add or to sell at this year's deadline? Either way, looking at what both Alex Cora and Craig Breslow said, it feels like they're somewhere in the middle still. It doesn't sound like they have picked a true direction as to where the Boston Red Sox are planning on going. And to me, it makes a lot of sense that the Red Sox are just somewhere in the middle right now, right? Because you take a look at this team, and again, you go back to, okay, what is this team going to look like in a month and a half? It's probably going to look completely different. Your infield's probably going to look completely different. By the MLB deadline, you're probably not going to have Dom Smith in an everyday role. You're probably not going to have Enmanuel Valdez in an everyday role. You're probably going to have Tyler O'Neill mixed in there somewhere. You're probably going to have Rob Refsnyder not in an everyday role, right? This lineup specifically is going to look completely different than it does right now, and it makes sense that neither of these guys want to commit one way or the other yet, because of the fact that we just don't know what this team is going to look like. But if they do end up being buyers at this year's deadline, we did also get our first indication as to what that could possibly look like. However, before we get into that, do me a favor. If you haven't already, make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button. We talk Red Sox content almost every single day. Also, make sure you guys have hit that like button as well. Not only does it help these videos out a ton, but it's also the best way you can let me know that you're enjoying the content we are putting out and you want to see more of it. Thank you all very much for doing so. Let's get into where the Red Sox could go at this year's deadline. The final little tidbit of news that came out about the possible Red Sox strategy heading into this year's deadline was an article in The Athletic by Jim Bowden that had a statement that read, right now Craig Breslow is looking for more starting pitching and a short-term solution at shortstop. To me, this makes absolutely perfect sense. Now, the Red Sox rotation has actually been really solid so far this year. They still have, despite regressing a little bit, the fourth best ERA in the entire sport in terms of starting pitching rotation. However, going into the second half here, basically every single one of your starting pitchers headed into uncharted territory, right? Only one, maybe two if you count Brian Bayo, pitchers have played an entire season as a starting pitcher at the big league level, and a lot of these guys are already well on their way, if not over half of the way, to hitting a career high in terms of innings pitched. There are going to be some interesting things that are going to happen with this rotation in the second half of the season. Going out and getting someone in this rotation that could help lend a hand to that, someone who has had experience being a big league pitcher before, someone who's had success, someone who's pitched a lot of innings, could really change the entire landscape of this rotation. It also could end up being a perfect opportunity for Craig Breslow to go out and get a longer term solution piece. There are going to be a few teams at the deadline here that end up going into full fire sale mode, and if that does happen, again, there are going to be some guys who hit the market who end end up being players who are not only rentals, but players who could impact this team in 2025 and beyond. At some point here, the Red Sox are going to have to make a decision and make a trade with the wealth of position prospects that they've developed over the last couple of years. If they get the opportunity to do it at this year's deadline, I absolutely believe that Craig Breslow will be able to pull that trigger. The other part of this too, with the shortstop, yeah, that makes a ton of sense, right? David Hamilton is swinging a really great bat right now, but he's still an absolute liability defensively. And when we've seen this team play its best baseball, it was when the Red Sox had a solid fundamental shortstop in their infield. Trevor Story at the beginning of the year, even though it was a small sample size, and say Don Rafaela taking over shortstop for a little bit was where we were seeing the Red Sox play their best baseball of the season. Getting a short-term solution in here, a guy who at the bare minimum is going to give you league average to slightly above league average defense, a guy like a Paul DeJong of the Chicago White Sox, who right now the White Sox are very clearly on the path of having a fire sale, and Paul DeJong's on a one-year deal, could do wonders for this Red Sox team. And again, you talk about what does this team look like when it's healthy, with a full infield of Casas, Grissom, say a Paul DeJong, and a Rafael Devers. All of a sudden, that looks a whole lot better to me than the infield does right now. So yeah, both of these make absolute perfect sense to me. And if the Red Sox do end up buying, this feels like exactly what they should be looking for. Now, one thing I do want to point out is in the past, Craig Breslow has pretty publicly mentioned that he's not looking to sit somewhere in the middle at deadlines. He wants to be a CBO or a GM or whatever you want to call it that picks a side, either buying or selling. But I don't know if that ends up being the best strategy for the Boston Red Sox. To be honest with you, a mix of both could end up being the best strategy, right? Because there are guys on this team that, regardless of where you're at coming into the trade deadline, probably should be shipped out. Kenley Jansen's a guy that you could put in that category. Chris Martin's a guy that you could put in that category. Even Tyler O'Neill, to some degree, is a player that even if the Red Sox are doing well, and even if the Red Sox do decide that they're going to be doing more buying than selling, could still be names that get shipped off at this year's deadline. And that could end up working out pretty well. If you are leaning into, hey, we are a development team, we are trying to get the most out of our young players, trading away these veterans on a one-year deal while also bringing in, let's say, a longer-term pitcher, a guy who's under control for 2 years, and a short-term shortstop, could end up working out really well for the Red Sox. To be totally honest with you, I get this question a lot. I don't know where the Red Sox are going to end up sitting at the deadline, and a big reason I don't know is because the Red Sox themselves have no idea. I think right now a lot of fans, especially over the last couple of weeks, have made up their mind that this team is absolutely going nowhere and that they should 100% sell at this year's deadline, but I don't think the Red Sox front office is totally on the same page as you. The Red Sox are 2 games out of a postseason, and to be honest with you, they could really use a playoff berth with everything that has happened PR-wise over the last few years, and if they are in a position to possibly get in or sneak into a postseason, I think the Red Sox will be slightly aggressive at this year's deadline. Now, that doesn't mean that they are going to go out and land a big piece, right? Go out and get that big fish, or that they're going to make any crazy moves, but I could see them adding marginally to help improve the floor of this team and hope that that's enough to push them 2 or 3 wins better than they are right now and into a postseason spot. It's a whole lot to think about right now, and to be honest with you, I don't know where the Red Sox sit because they flat out don't know either, but I do think if the deadline were today and you were talking about all the guys coming back from the IL and what this team needs and how little it would take to actually get that, I think they buy if the deadline was tomorrow. That's just my opinion. So right now I'm leaning towards the Red Sox could possibly be buyers. I still think there's a very good chance they end up being sellers, but I do think there's a chance that they're buyers at this year's deadline. However, that's just my opinion. So let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think? What do you think about Breslow's and Cora's comments? What do you think about the report that they are actively looking for a starting pitcher and a short-term solution at shortstop? And what do you think the Red Sox should do at this year's deadline? Let me know all your thoughts on the latest Red Sox news in the comment section down below. As always, if you made it to the end of this video, do me a favor. Make sure you guys have hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Like I said, if you're new here, we talk Red Sox almost every single day. Also, make sure you guys have hit the like button as well. Again, it not only just helps me out a ton, but it also is the best way to let me know that you're enjoying the content we're putting out. Thank you all very much for clicking on this one, and I will see you in the red seats.